Chapter number 2. All right, if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn them over. We are in the New Testament. Go to the back, probably the easiest way to find it, and reverse, hit the rewind button until you get to 1 John chapter number 2. We have been making our way from the very beginning of this book all the way through chapter number 2, verse 15. So go to 15. We've got 3 verses today, and man, I'm telling you, they are packed with some goodness. They are packed with some stuff that I believe you're going to be able to leave here today and say, man, I've gotten some things I need to walk out, believe in, start wrestling with, and hopefully find them inside of your life. So without further ado, get there. If you don't have your Bible, we have one. It's going to be right up here on the screen, so don't worry. You do not come empty-handed. You're in a good place. If you missed any of the past messages and you're thinking, hey, if we're in chapter 2, I've missed a whole lot. That's all right. You're not out of place. This is still a standalone message. But if you want to go back and listen to some of the message, either listen to them again or listen to them for the first time, you can download our app or go to the website and check those out and then and be all caught up all the way to chapter 2. So here it is. Let's go ahead and bring it up. I need your help. I want you to read this out with me. This is it. 3 verses right here. And as you read it out loud, we're going to all do this together in unison. I want you to read it over your soul. I want you to read it so that your soul actually starts to listen to these truths so that you'll leave here encouraged, built up, and you're going to actually establish a little bit of faith that needs to rise up in your life. Because it says, by the word of God, faith comes by actually hearing this word. So speak it over your soul. Speak it over your soul. You guys ready? 15. Here we go. Let's read it out together. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and desires of the eyes and pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. That's good. Now this might be a little bit familiar to you if you've been through this particular book before, 1 John, or if you've heard a little bit about the New Testament idea. I think that there's a bad rap sometimes when the two forces are at odds with one another. Whenever you become a Christian, you almost have to be anti-world. Some people say, hey, if you're following Jesus, you can't have any world inside of you. So a lot of Christians or some churches will be to the extreme, and they'll take this particular verse and say, hey, you're not supposed to love the world or the things in it, but you're actually supposed to love God. Your love for God is supposed to be more dominant than the love for the world. And then, so they take that extreme and go polar opposites with it and preach a message sort of like this. Hey, you guys are at church, that's great, that you need to be, and then when you leave here, go get in the Word, read for 17 hours straight, and then make sure you don't go out into the world. Lock yourself up in your room, close the door, don't turn on TV, don't turn on the internet. You just need to be a hermit crab if you're going to be a Christian. Make sure that you separate from the world because the world is evil. That's what a lot of people say. I just want to go on the record books right now and say, if you are a part of this church, that is not what we believe. We believe exactly what Jesus thought and believed in and taught us and physically walked out, which is God actually came down and loved the world so much. Come on, somebody. He didn't just love it. He says, I'll love the world so much that I'm going to come down from heaven, leave my throne, leave perfection, come down, be among you, be with you, so that I can show you what the love of the Father really truly looks like. And you can get a glimpse of that. And I want to make sure to go out in dark places and demonstrate the love of God so that you know what it looks like, so that you can see the example. And in that example, what I want you to do is allow your past not to define your future, so that you can be released, free to live like you're fully and completely loved. So today's contrast, as John usually does, if you've been with us for the past few weeks, John does a lot of contrasting. Light versus darkness, good versus bad, God versus everything else. Well, here he says, listen, the contrast is again where you receive your love. Do you get it from the world or do you get it from God? And so the idea is not that if you're a Christian, you need to be anti-world, everything else is evil. No, not at all. You need to make sure that your external world is not actually being moved and actually changing your inside world. What God wants you to know is you receiving the love of God all up in here will define and give you a perspective about how you see everything out there. But what he doesn't want you to do is reverse that order to say how the world operates is how you're supposed to see yourself, because that's where the lies come in. That's where the lies start to come in. And so John breaks it down. There's 3 lies that you have a temptation to believe. And he says it right here in verse 16. All the things that are in the world, this is what I want you to get rid of. This is what I want to make sure that you don't attach yourself. He says all the things that are in the world are 3 things: the desire of the flesh, the desire of the eyes, and the pride of your life. So he says these 3 things: the desire of your flesh, the desire of your eyes, and the pride of life. These are 3 lies. They're 3 temptations. And let me just say it like this. These 3 truths are the world's operating system. It has been from the past, still is today, and it will continue to be tomorrow. You want to know why? Because Satan doesn't have any other ammo. This is the system that he tried to tempt Eve with way back in the garden. This is what he tempted Jesus with in Matthew chapter 3, and this is what he tempts you with today, and he's going to do it tomorrow. So don't be surprised after we leave here today that you're tempted to actually stir up your affections, your encouragement, your identity in one of these 3 areas. Now, if this language doesn't really connect with you, let me give it to you in today's language. The 3 temptations are this: that you are what you do. You are what you do. That's a lie. That's a lie that tells you based on your performance, you're either good and you're doing well, there's some encouragement, there's some value, or if you're not doing well, then you're going to ride that slope as well. You're going to be up and down like a roller coaster if your identity rolls from your performance. And can I just tell you guys, this world is based strategically on defining you as a person simply by performance. And we need to get rid of this. We need to get away from that temptation, that lie. The second lie that John says in here is the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes. The desires of the eyes are actually you are what you have. It's based on your possessions. If you have a lot, you must be a big deal. If you own some nice cars, you must be rich and must be worth somebody. If you have a lot of followers, that must be you have some possessions to hold on to. But there's the lie. That's not at all who you are. Based on what you own is actually what owns you. And if you can't give it away, you think you're controlling it, but it controls you. And so John says there's 3 things: the desire that you have to own the flesh, the desire that's inside of your eyes, and actually the pride of life, which the third one is really just popularity. The third one, the pride of just accomplishments. You want to make sure that you listen to every voice around you. You want to make sure that you hear and you listen to all those other people, because apparently they're speaking into your life, but all they're really doing is just restricting you. Church, can I tell you, one of the most destructive things inside and outside the church that's happening is an idea called comparison. The moment you compare yourself with one of the other persons, God is not going to be able to actually allow to speak into your life, your destiny, because you're trying to live somebody else. Don't try to get into their shoes. It's not going to fit. Just like David, what can't put in Saul's armor. You know, whenever you go out to battle, you can't wear someone else's weapon, someone else's armor, because that's not what you're called to do. You have another army, you have another role, you have another place to fill. So put on your shoes. They're designed just for you. So when you walk out, stop comparing yourself or even listening to the operations of everybody else to say, hey, I am what other people say. I am what other people think about me. Instead of letting that define you and restrict you like a prison, let the freedom that God gives you, because it's based on what God says who you are, not what man thinks you should be. And so whenever these 3 temptations try to rule and to run your life, you have to move these 3 temptations, these 3 lies, and you have to start to destroy them and break them down with these 3 truths. The same truths that God told Jesus, couple with these 3 temptations. You are not what you own, you are not what they say about you, and you are not what you do. That is not who defines you. Who defines you is the one who created you. He knows you best. Now let me just tell you, you don't have to believe in God to know that truth. Because when you don't receive your truth, if you don't have a relationship with God, I promise you, and that's not because of my words, this is just humanity, you will stir, you will search, you will aim, you will go move every single crevice, and you'll get into every single thing you can just to try to satisfy the gaps and the things that are going on in your soul, but you're never going to until you just rest in the truth that God says, you are my son. You are loved, and I am pleased with you. Those 3 words define your identity. Instead of letting these 3 lies start to define who you are, your popularity, your possessions, and your performance. So I need to tell you a little bit about what John's writing here in these 15 through 17 verses, and actually tell you where he got these 3 truths. These 3 truths right now that we're going through in 1 John 2 actually come over in the Gospels, and they show up in Jesus' life. Jesus, when he first became on the scene, all the Gospels, at the very beginning of Matthew, it's in Matthew chapter 3. The very beginning of the book of Mark, it's in Mark chapter 1, where Jesus comes out on the scene, sheer silence. He's about 30 years old. Jesus comes on the scene, and the first thing that happens is he becomes baptized. Jesus is baptized at the very beginning of every part of the Gospels. It's amazing. It's a brilliant beginning. And the reason why is because what happens at his baptism, this is the beginning of Jesus' approval for the entire walk that he's about to do on earth. He's going to shatter things. He's going to break new norms. He's going to bring in a very new kingdom. He's going to display what love looks like. And it starts by actually receiving the approval of his Father. Isn't that what you and I want more than anything? Are we loved? Are we approved? Do we fit in? Does anybody care about me? That's our cry with everything, every single post that you have on social media. But what we need to do is not be tempted and find that somewhere else and find where it needs to rest from God's voice to your soul. So at the very beginning, Jesus is baptized and God rips open the heavens, and he speaks this. Matthew chapter 3. Go ahead and pull that up. Check this out. Matthew chapter 3. God says, you are my son. Truth number 1. Truth number 2. He says, I love you. This is my son in whom I love. Truth number 2. Truth number 3. I am pleased with you. You are my son whom I love, and I am pleased with you. I don't know if you're catching this, but these 3 truths line up perfectly with the 3 temptations that we sometimes fall to. So now, check this out. I'm going to pause. I want to tell you about this story, but I need you to make the connection. These 3 truths, you are a son and you are a daughter. That means if God has already given you the title as a gift, he has chosen you. You didn't choose him. If that's true, you don't need to perform anything. You don't need to try. You don't need to aim. You don't need to climb up the corporate ladder. You don't need to make that a certain amount of money. You don't need to try to get that person's attention because you've already gotten the attention of the creator of heaven and earth. And he says you're qualified, not based on what you do. So stop performing. You're qualified because God said so. You're my son. You're my daughter. That's it. I'm your father. You are my son. You are my daughter. And then the second truth that we have a temptation to believe is really based off the fact that I think I'm loved. Truth number 2, I think I'm loved. But then the temptation is I'm not really sure I do, so that I need to make sure that I go out and get it from other things. Am I loved? Well, I love new things. So if I surround myself with new things, then maybe I'll start to think inside that I'm made new. Come on, you catching this, church? God says, God's the only one. I make things new. I want to renew your minds. I want to renew your soul. I want to give you a new heart. He talks about that language all over the place. That's why we love new things on products, but sometimes we get confused with hoping that product will actually give us some sort of encouragement. But he says, the desire of the eyes, the Bible talks about in Proverbs and all over the place, the desires of your eyes are never satisfied. That's why when you're like 16 years old, finally you got a car. It doesn't matter if it's a junker, it's a car. And then when you're 16 years old and you get your driver's license and you get in that car, what happens next? You don't like that car. You need a new one. Come on, somebody, you ever been there? Like you're 16 years old, you don't need a car, you need a tricycle, but you're sitting in this beater because it's, just passed down to you, and you're driving this thing and you're thinking, man, my friend has this car. And then the comparison comes. Your eyes are always going to want more. Think about it. This is what happens in marriage too. I mean, come on, how long were you single when you were just waiting, crying out to God? This is absolutely ridiculous. I need to be married. And then God gives you your spouse. And then what do? You lust after somebody else because your eyes are never satisfied. This is the lie that tends to run throughout the message of society that we got to stop believing and actually walking out. We have to think, you know what? I am a son. I am loved. So I need to stop looking for it in other places. The desire of my eyes are never going to be satisfied, but if my soul is satisfied, my eyes will stop looking. And the third one is, God is pleased with you. He's just pleased with you. You are actually the apple of his eye. That's what he said. And you didn't do anything to deserve it. You just are. And the fact that you are so unique, you think you're different and you want to be like everybody else. And God says, please don't do that. I made you like that. You think you're broken, and he says, you're perfect. You think your past defines you, and I say, no, I define you. You think that what you have owns you. No. What you're storing in heaven, that's what you have. See, your possessions don't actually describe your identity. It's not what you keep, it's what you give away that actually describes your worth. Come on, church, you catching this? It's what we are able to give away. Because he says if you're not able to give away your entire life, you're going to lose it. But if you give your life, then you're going to find it. In Proverbs, it actually says, the world of the generous gets bigger and bigger, while the world of the stingy shrink. So when you give your words freely because God gave them to you. When you're healthy, give your health away. Serve. When you have hands, when you have a talent, give that away. If God's given you money, give it away. Why? Because he's given it to you. See, that's where the confusion is. No. If I am my money, if I am my possessions, I got to hold on to them and hoard them. God's like, just for the record, you never got any of it. All I want you to do is give away 10% consistently to the church. You know how hard it is for our church to do that consistently? Just to say, you know what, I'm going to tithe. I'm going to give 10% every single time. When I get paid, God gives me money, and I'm going to say, I'm going to give it back. This is family. You wouldn't look at your family and be like, no, I don't believe in that concept. You don't believe in supporting other churches? I'm not saying this to encourage you guys to give so that the church can need it. God doesn't need our money. It's a blessing on us. At most every single time that God talks about giving, you want to know who he's talking about is the blessed person? It's the one who actually gives, not the one that receives. He says, I want you to give, I want you to give, I want you to give. Why? Because if you have the idea and the heart and the soul of a generous person, there's nothing that's going to ever hold on to you. But too far as the money starts to leak up there, and the love of money is the root of that evil. And so that becomes your God instead of God himself. That's when I want to break off your life, he says. That's whenever John says, I don't want you to love the world. You want to know why? Because the world's operating system is finances. It is money. It is status. It is possessions. And I want you to get free from that. Free. Because who the Son sets free will be free indeed. And so when you go through these three temptations, you also categorize them with these three truths that Jesus actually sought out. Now, back to the story in context. You guys ready? I just hit the pause button. Back to Jesus, very beginning of the Gospels. He gets baptized. God comes down and says, you are my son, in whom I am well pleased, and I love you. Three truths. But you got to categorize these. When you walk through these, this is massively important. Jesus hasn't done anything to prove his love. I mean, God rips open the heavens and he says, listen, public announcement, this guy is with me. So that's my son. Come on, parents, it's Mother's Day. Parents, if you look around, how proud are you when you see your child in a crowd, at school, in a sporting event, concert, whatever, and you spot him and you're like, it's my boy right there. And like my son right now, he's 3 years old, he's doing soccer. It's 3-year-old, I don't think you can call it soccer. They toss 1 or 2 balls in there and kids just go wherever. And there's not really one coach. All the parents are coaches. We're like pretty much bordering the soccer field. No, stay over there. Go get that ball. Okay, yeah, sure, get that one. Not the butterfly, buddy. And at some point in time, I think I catch God's heart and sitting on the sidelines and be like, yeah, that dude right there, the one that's scoring the wrong goal, walking in the wrong direction, picking flowers, sitting down when he should be running. That's my boy. Yeah, you've got no right to be proud, but you are. You know what I mean? I'm just walking around the soccer field and be like, that was mine, that was mine, that one's mine, everybody. And they're like, you mean that one? And they're like, oh yeah, I'll be back. And you're like, you chase them around, but God's like, I'll chase you forever. I'll pursue you because that's how much I love you. Until you get it. Until you really start to understand you are not what you own. You are not what you have. You are not what other people say about you. You are what I say about you. And you're going to be restless until you rest in that truth. So let me just say this. If you're writing notes, I want you to write this idea down. God gives identity. God gives you your identity before. The order is really important. God gives you your identity before you perform anything. God says who you are way before you do anything. Therefore, your identity is not your performance. God gives you your identity before performance. You want to know why? It's a gift. It's a gift of life. In Him, you live, you move, and you have your being. In Him, you have gifts. Use them. In Him, you have breath in your lungs. Use it to give Him some worship. Use it to speak life into somebody else. You have a talent. You want to know where that came from? God. You have health. You want to know where that came from? Him. He's the creator of everything. So when you look at these particular truths, you got to know God gives you your identity before you perform anything. That's exactly what He does with Jesus, and that's exactly what we should do as parents and as humans. Actually encourage one another for who they are, not what they do. And make sure the order is proper. Now, Satan, on the other hand, he gives identity only after you perform. Listen to what he says. Satan actually has a conversation with Jesus. This is how it goes. Satan says, listen, if you are the Son of God, then prove it by turning these stones into bread. Come on, I heard it. I was at your baptism. It was pretty exciting. The heavens ripped open. Didn't happen for me, but it happened for you. Big deal, but now I want you to prove it. Come on, how much is that language engulfed in high school, engulfed in college? You're really good? Let me see it. How much is that as adults we just have never shaken? We still do that at work. We try to climb up the ladder and get the title and get the status and get the money and get the cars so that we can let everybody know, see, I made it. I did it. I'm a self-made man. Nobody cares about being self-made. What we're really wrestling for is to find out who made us. And so here are the temptations. Satan comes back to Jesus. If you are really the Son of God, then prove it by turning those rocks into bread. Second thing he says, Satan actually tempts him, hey, if you are the Son of God, I'll give you all these kingdoms. I'll give you all these possessions. All of them can be yours. Now, what right does Satan have to offer Jesus everything in the world? Every right. Because they actually were owned by Satan because of Adam. But Jesus, at this particular mark, takes it back. Living a perfect life, dying on the death, raising from the dead, coming back and saying, now I'm giving that authority back to you. Now please, John says, don't get wrapped up in the confusion to find your identity in somewhere where it doesn't belong. Lie number 3 that Satan actually tries to give over to Satan is the popularity. He says, listen, he takes him on the big cliff and he goes, I got a great idea. I want you to throw yourself off of this cliff, and I bet you the angels, the legion, the hundreds and thousands of angels will never let you die like that. They will swoop around. It'll be caught by every news camera and person who has a cell phone with a video on it, and then all of a sudden, you'll be popular. Your followers will go up. Everyone will listen to you. Lights will go on. Everyone will be wanting an interview. You'll be on every news station and TV station, and that's where the credits roll. Popularity is the way to go. Jesus is like, I'm not going to take that route either. I'm going to go back, live in private, speak in private, give in secret, love in secret, and let that reverberate through the world. I'm going to live a perfect life, die a perfect death, to take on what you deserve so that I can give you what only I earn. The right standing and the love of God. That's who you are. You are a son. You are loved. And I am pleased with you. Now, these three truths need to sink down deep in our soul. We need to be reminded of them all the time. One is that you're a son, you're a daughter. Nothing's ever going to change that. The great news about it, you didn't choose God. He chose you. And he had right, church, listen, he had a right not to choose you. He had a right not to choose you. You were dirty. You still are. You're messed up. You're a sinner. At your worst point in time, still at this point, and when you were not well off, God says, I'm still going to love you. You are amazing. You're like, I don't see any of that. God says, I do. I do. So you might still look at your sin, but I look at who you are, not what you've done. You are perfect. You are righteous. You are beautiful. You're my creation. The world has gotten you a little bit dirty, but don't believe that. Because right believing sets you free to right living. And I want you to live rightly. That's being a son, being a daughter. But then the second truth is being loved. Now, I thought they went hand in hand. If you're a son, if you're a daughter, aren't you loved always? No. Clearly, you haven't been in a broken home before. You can be a son. You can be a daughter. You can have guardians. You can have grandparents. You can have fathers and mothers. You can have people with your last name, but they don't treat you like you're loved. That's the unfortunate side effect. Is that we have people coming up from a past who actually think that they know what love is. And so when they become 18 or old enough to date, you want to know who they pursue? The ones who abuse them, talk down about them, curse them, and maybe even physically abuse them. Why? It's because if you go back in their past and you figure out where they were raised, they were abused by their dad or their mom or their grandparent or their guardian. So when they grew up, where they received love is where they actually had the connection of their identity. I guess that's how I'm defined. So when I'm old enough, that's what I'm going to go pursue. Someone who will treat me the way my guardian or my dad treated me. The abuse, verbal or physical. And that wasn't even close to God's plan. And let me just destroy the lie that might be falling in your head because of your past. It is not your fault. It is not your fault. Your past is never going to limit you, so don't let it. God will break you free the moment you just accept the truth that you're His son, you're His daughter, you are loved. And now the two can connect, and you are pleased in His eyes. See, there's no performance that can ever muster up the place so that we can actually earn God's love. God says, I've never made it that way. I want you to receive my love. This is who you are. This is your identity. This is how I've made you. And I want to make sure that you go through these particular truths knowing that I don't want you to get this from the world. I don't want you to get it from anybody else or anybody that says this, the popular opinion, your possessions or your performance. It's not coming from that. It's coming from me and me alone. So if you get the chance, you just tuck yourself away with God and just ask this question. Wait for the answer. Maybe even write it down because you might forget. How do you see me, God? I know what I see when I look into the mirror, and I think I know what other people see when they see me, but God, how do you see me? Ask that question. Ask, God, what do you think about me? What's the name that you call me? Because he's got a name for you. You know how families tend to do nicknames? Call each other stuff, hopefully positive and encouraging. Sometimes not. No really guarantee. God has a name for you. And it's just for you. Ask him what that is. God, what do you call me? How do you see me? And wait for the answer. And see that it won't define everything that you walk out after you hear that. You know, I think it's funny between the conversation that Jesus had with Satan. Satan was there at the baptism, and he actually quotes back to Jesus what God said to him. You ever find that interesting? Where is the attack probably coming from? Inside of your mind? You ever question what happened? You ever question when you leave church what was said? Gosh, that was really good. What was he talking about? Like at the moment, it was just, yeah. When you read, whenever you get into the Word, and then you walk out there 5 minutes later, you're thinking, was I in Genesis or the New Testament? Was that even the Bible that I was reading? And you tend to have your mind be scattered. That's where the lies start. But that's where the truth comes in and sets you free. I think it's interesting that Jesus and Satan actually have a conversation. And Satan quotes back to Jesus what God says about him, but he leaves out one massively important point. Let me just recall. God says to Jesus, "You're my son, whom I love, and I'm well pleased." Satan only says, I know. You're the son. You know what he leaves out? Your love. Your love. Satan has no idea what being loved unconditionally by the Father really looks like. And he's been wrestling that since the beginning. He got kicked out of heaven because of that pride, and he's trying to catch everybody else into that same mentality to hold us back and restrict us from that lie. And God wants to set you free and tell you something today. You're a son, you're a daughter. You're loved, and God is well pleased with you. If you let that resonate with your soul, that will go and transform a city. That will fill up a family. That will define your destiny. That will expose and actually increase your life. Then you can be generous with your life, with your words, with your love, with everything else. You're not offended with people. You don't catch criticism. You actually give out what you have received. The love of a Father that's unconditional. In Jesus' name.